Okay. So without further ado, since we're a small group, I don't think we have to spotlight at this point. But if we get bigger, I'll spotlight everyone. But we're gonna jump in. So please give a virtual round of applause to our speakers, Helen and Miguel from LA Moss and Oscar from SOMOS Mayfair. So thank you all for making time to share your experience with community engagement in housing co-ops. We'll do a round of quick introductions. Oscar, if you don't mind going first, if you can share a bit about yourself, the background, your organization experience, and how you got started on the co-op housing journey.
Sure. My name is Óscar Quiroz-Medrano. I am a coordinator with SOMOS Mayfair, working with a group of community members called Vecinos Activos. And we've been exploring limited equity housing co-ops for about quite some time now. It originally started with understanding the model. They saw the big gap in the need in the community. And from there, they started doing research, and landed on limited equity housing co-ops as the solution for the need in the community. And so, I can jump into a little bit more details as we go. And I'm going to be wearing my sunglasses just because I have light sensitivity from the screen. And so I'll pass it over to Helen.
Thanks, Oscar. Hi, everyone. Great to meet you. My name is Helen. I'm with LA Moss. We are a community-based organization in Northeast LA, down in the city of Los Angeles. And we've been around for about 10 years. And the last couple of years, we have been more place-based as an organization. But our housing work started with creating an affordable accessory dwelling unit program that was kind of citywide. And when we shifted our focus to be kind of grounded in Northeast LA with working class communities of color, we heard from residents that they wanted to stay in their neighborhoods. The neighborhoods where we work are quickly gentrifying, kind of a hot market. And that was how we landed where we are now, which is a housing strategy that is focused on leveraging existing opportunities, policy programs, funding sources to really just help acquire property on behalf of community members so they can stay in their neighborhood. And see, yeah, I'll pass it over to Miguel and we can share a little bit more about our strategies later.
Awesome. So good morning, everybody. My name is Miguel Ramos. I'm the Director of Community Initiatives at LA Moss. And yeah, I support a lot of kind of similar to like what Helen was talking about, really thinking about how to make in a like quickly gentrifying community, how to really make housing accessible and how to discuss it. And kind of similar to like what Oscar was mentioning is like, how do we make it accessible in a way that people can understand the possibilities and just kind of imagine what collaboration could bring to a community that's gentrifying.
Thank you all for the wonderful quick introduction. So I think we're just gonna dive in. For those who want to follow along, the link for the notes has the prompt questions if you guys want to follow along there. But we'll dive into our first one. So how do initial conversations start between future members and your organizations? Feel free to, if anyone wants to jump in first, or we can do like a round robin.
Yeah, I could go first. Kind of our initial conversations really start up with just building relationships. And what we have is we have a couple different programs that do that really support that effort. And really like hone into the cultural practices of communities, whether that's through our kind of regenerative economies program, which really supports, working class, like community serving entrepreneurs, building a relationship and like, being able to connect them to resources, but also our community tending program. It's a program where we support, that relationship building of the community, but also with the connection to the land. And so like having spaces like that really allow for opportunity for people to just like organically share and build, and so the initial conversation just comes from like getting to know each other in a place where people can show up as who they are, you know, and from there, that's when like a lot of the conversations, a lot of in-depth conversations come, and you know, we start diving into the exciting stuff. But yeah, a lot of what we do too is we do exchange fairs, you know, some of the past work that we've done. So it's like a non-monetary event where, you know, we do like a seed exchange, clothing exchange, like knowledge shares, providing free food from our community serving entrepreneurs, you know, being able to activate a community in a different way that shifts away from that like extractive consumer based, you know, perspective that you know, much of our society is kind of you know, based on. But it's beautiful that, you know, a lot of these practices are actually something that have been already been carried along from a lot of the community members that we work with, you know, as they start talking about that. Oh yeah, this brings them back to the time that they were in Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, you know, just like these cultural practices that you don't see so often. So it's great to like connect with people in that way, and really to like shift that conversation to like, if this is a way that we could be with each other, then this is the same way that we could be with the land and with our housing, right? And so this is really a like a deeper connection and a change of culture of how we think about our relationship to land and housing.
And Oscar, do you have more to add? I saw your hand raised.
Yes. So for us, we have different avenues how folks come into our program. So we have a family resource center. We're working with First Five. We also focus on leadership development. So we have something called UPM, which is where they offer different courses like organizing, facilitation, note-taking. So different seminars that our community members have access to. And through those programs, our leaders are able to essentially have leadership development to be able to apply to either their job or either the campaigns that we're working with. But primarily, our focus is when it comes to creating policies that benefit residents or San Jose residents or East Side San Jose residents, where, for example, a policy that we're working right now is a tenant preference policy that allows community folks who are surrounding apartment complex to actually have the opportunity to live in that complex. Usually what has happened is where new affordable housing developments come in, our folks don't have access to that. So this policy is able to align to be able to give more access to our folks. And through that process of doing door knocking and advocating for this policy, we're working with other organizations. And through that process, other residents know about the work that we're doing. But for us and our limited equity housing co-op project, we have already had essentially like a vision committee that started about 3 years ago, really research and understand different models. And then from there, that's where our folks said, this is the model, limited equity housing model is what we want to focus on. And so from that, like similar to what Miguel was saying, is where our folks do have experience back in the, you know, in Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, and bring that knowledge into these spaces to be able to essentially push the work that we're doing to moving forward. And through there, that's where folks educate each other through. We have the mentorship program, which is related to the leadership development. And so we try to really create that essentially that incubator to really prompt this system to be able to expand it and educate more folks about these models, about this model.
Thank you for sharing that kickoff question. And following up with that, as they're starting to explore the housing co-ops model, like what's exciting about this model for the future members? Like, why are they gravitating toward it? Like, what brings up their energy?
I could jump in. This one actually is really powerful for our folks. Is, you know, we just had our co-op financial workshop last week, and so folks were able to understand the details and the benefits, financial benefits that limited equity housing co-ops really bring. One is tax deductions. The other is it's a stepping stone towards single family home ownership that our folks are interested in, but there's a gap in between, and this is how we fill in that gap. Also, it creates stability. A lot of our folks move from apartment to apartment, 3 times, 6 times in a year or 2 years. And so it's really it's unhealthy for the family to be in such an unpredictable space when they're moving from apartment to apartment. So the biggest benefit that folks see in this is actually just having stable, safe, and and affordable housing, that they can actually not be worried that within a year or when their contract ends that they're going to be essentially uplifted from their current home or in the current their school district, or having to drive 20 minutes across town to go to the current district before they were displaced. And so this is what really attracts our folks, is that type of benefit, but at the same time is the overall cost savings associated with limited equity housing co-ops that are really interested for folks, making decisions, and having a collective ownership, a governance is another piece where people feel empowered because they get to make their own decisions where they live, instead of having to listen to a property manager or an owner that usually never comes on the property.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. That's definitely some of the same sentiment that we get from our community, right? Is that, they want to be part of the decision making. They want to be able to work with their community and families to like really develop some type of foundation that could create stable housing, right? The kind of similar to what you're saying, Oscar. It's that important piece of stability. And a lot of people are connected to their community, connected to the place where they live. And so in this case, people wanting to stay in their community, especially here in Northeast Los Angeles, where like house prices are ridiculous and kind of like could be out of reach for many of these families. But it's like, to be able to think about like, well, there's some opportunity for collaboration, there's an opportunity to bring in family and community, and also like just it being an educational opportunity, like people don't know what the process is, just to get a home, right? And then this way it's like a collective learning process amongst all the people that are participating in the housing co-op. And similar to Oscar, a lot of folks have kind of want to strive to eventually do like be like connected to a single family home, right? And so this is a good opportunity for like a stepping stone where they could like be able to establish themselves, build up some aspect of equity, some ability to save, and again, stability. I think those are all like key pieces of what excites people for the housing co-op. Yeah.
Oh, that's sure. As well as like, thank you for all the introductions in the chat. Feel free to have a conversation there as we work our way through the questions. But on the flip side of like what excites people about housing co-ops, like what intimidates some of the folks about housing co-ops?
I can get started. It is a very different model than what society offers, and a lot of our community members, aspire for that home ownership because it has stability, there's agency, and I think because we're in a very hot market, that is not like a path that is possible immediately. So as an organization that wants to support the collective and the collective community, kind of our values are to promote kind of what does it look like when community members can steward property together. And so we're still in the place, unlike where Oscar is, where you guys are introducing the co-op and people are like, I'm signing up. We spent a year understanding what kind of community members' concerns are, and now have landed at strategies that include, well, how do we make it possible in this climate? So our goal, just as a framework, is our goal is like, well, we want to figure out how to support the community in being the anti-flippers, acquiring property before, corporate landlords or flippers acquire property. We want to help community members get together and acquire properties on their own. We want LA Mas as an organization to, use public subsidy and acquire property. And all of these strategies will have this aspiration of having community members being able to steward the property and having a cooperative decision-making process. So we're at the phase where we're sharing that with community members, which is like, we heard what you want, which is to stay in your neighborhood and have stability, affordability, and agency. And here are some of the ways we can get here that's unique to where LA's landscape is right now. So as we've been introducing the idea of co-ops to community members, I think just like getting along with people who are your neighbors, like it's hard enough to make decisions with your family, but to do it with neighbors is something that is going to be a process. And there's a lot of time commitment. We facilitate lots of cooperative kind of decision-making processes. Miguel mentioned our regenerative economies, and we have a food justice collaborative that takes a lot of time. So I think that what Miguel provided before, which is like how is their trust and how is their relationship building, we're kind of building on that, but we're still in the very early stage. So hearing Óscar talk about how you guys are like, oh, here's the co-op 101, we're about to start that. We spent the last year understanding what the concerns were and proposing a solution that community members can join us in problem solving.
For us, one of the biggest concerns is documentation status. Our folks are undocumented. Some of our folks are undocumented, and going after public funding is a problem for us, just because we can't use those funds for those units. But at the same time, our community is saying, okay, this is really challenging, but how do we find solutions to this process? And that's something that the conversation has really been about. Fundraising is something that we're figuring out at the moment. Is kind of like, how are we going to gather all this money to make this project work? And that's something that our community we're still looking into and seeing how everything's going to pencil out, because not being tax exempt for these projects, or having other challenges within the city when it comes down to council members not supporting certain policies that benefit projects like this, or not wanting to allocate funding towards projects like this, is a challenge. And if we don't have full support of, the residents are in full support of this project, but we also need full support of the city officials, and we also need support in the Santa Clara County, or in the counties, which we feel strongly for. However, there is some, how would you say, pushback towards some of these new models, because they do compete with the existing idea of real estate. And so that is one of the challenges that we do have and we've been experiencing. However, we're focused on the education piece right now, and then as we're going is, okay, how do we work with different consultants? How do we work with different agencies and organizations to be able to find solutions to those problems, or to those questions that do come up through that process?
Thank you for both for sharing. Before we move on to the next question, I will just open it up that I think we probably have some leeway for like a little bit back and forth as we're going through those questions. Just given that this is a very small group, and it continues to grow, I think, with the hour. So I may walk it back a little, but if there's anything you guys want to follow up on, just let me know and just throw it into the chat, and I'll see about weaving it in. Hey, and so onward to the next question, and I believe both of you guys have talked about this, about how this is a stepping stone to home ownership, given the current economic situation in our country right now. But are there any key differences that come up when discussing buying a single family home or condo compared to joining a housing co-op? Óscar, I see a nod, so go for it.
One of the biggest benefits is that when it comes into limited equity housing co-op compared to a single family home ownership, there's greater safety in numbers, right? So you have less likely chances of defaulting on your loan when it comes into going into a limited equity housing co-op, because not one specific person takes out the loan. It's actually called a blanket loan. So the whole property is there involved in essentially paying that loan back, compared to a single family home, where there's only one person, or trying to make up the mortgage that is owed. And so there is safety in that sense that our folks really liked about the model, because of that safety. For example, someone does lose their job, what happens during that time? There's safety in a limited equity housing co-op, where the co-op sets up an emergency fund, for example, that actually is able to help pay the remaining, or that person's mortgage or payment, until they get reemployed. And so you don't have that safety net if you do go into a single family home. It's more of a stress in that sense. And so that is one of the biggest benefits that our folks really enjoy about it. Also, being able to save more, because you're not paying the full price on your own. The full price of the loan is divided into however many different co-op members are in that apartment complex or in that property.
I would say for us, since we're in a earlier stage, I think that even though it's a lot more inaccessible given the current system of single family home ownership, it's an easier to understand process. There's a lot of like first time home buyer workshops out there, but in contrast, housing co-ops are kind of a little more complicated to understand. And so for us, we'll be continue to do popular education to kind of explain that it's not as complicated. There's avenues to work together. And I think that's kind of the big difference that like our society doesn't have in where we are, or in the US. Like housing co-ops is not a natural kind of state of options for community members. So it'll be exciting for us to kind of start that journey of getting into the details that Oscar is saying, so that you can really compare the difference and be really compelled to be able to do it in community than to do it on your own, where it's the barriers are much more steep.
Okay. And I will move it on to the next one, but feel free as you guys, I saw Eric dropping in. I think in response to some of the things that you raised up, Helen, about opportunities and barriers, about mortgages, as well as Oscar. And I might kind of like pull this in like later on as well. So, I know you guys both are in different stages of the housing co-op journey, but just wondering, like, how do you talk about member selection with prospective members? Like, is it default that everyone who's talking about this is going to be part of the future co-ops? Are some people aware that they may not be, it might be a longer journey for others? Just wondering, like, how are those conversations unfolding?
Helen or Miguel, you'd like to chime in first, or I can jump in?
Jump in.
Sure. So for us, when it comes into like the selection process, we have not created a formal selection process just yet. The reason why is because each cooperative could handle their selection process differently. And so since we do have a pilot project going on, we're waiting until we start talking to the lawyer to really start putting in those pieces together. However, what we do is, let me add this to the chat, and or I could read this to you. It says, essentially, it's kind of a baseline of what we're using to create like an equal opportunity when it comes into living in one of these places or one of these co-ops. It's called, we are committed to overcoming all forms of oppression, including but not limited to oppression based on race, class, sex, gender, ability, sexual orientation, age, nationality, region, political affiliation, citizenship, level of education. We cannot claim to voluntarily be voluntary and open to organizations while remaining neutral to the face of systemic oppression. So we're using that language in order to kind of influence what that selection process may look like. However, we do acknowledge that community members, or those are folks who do live in the co-op, ultimately have that decision of what that process looks like. And so we're still in that shaping of that process.
And I would say for us, because we're planning to convene a housing working group with residents who are interested in joining us. We want to be open to what the opportunities are based on where residents are. There might be some residents who are in an apartment complex that is being sold. And if that's the case, if we can figure out how to acquire it, like there will be certain kind of interests of existing tenants. We might also want to tap into public policy that was passed. There was a funding measure called Unite to House that I'll put in the chat. And this is it's a tax on properties over 5 million. It's like going to be a humongous source of funding to support kind of alternative models of housing. And when that money gets kind of dispersed by the city, they're going to come with like limitations, and whether it's like you have to do fair housing. So this may not work if you start with an existing co-op, but maybe it would work if we absorb that funding as an organization. So we're trying to be very open to figuring out, well, depending on who are the residents who are interested, whether it's acquiring a property they live in, whether it's acquiring new property, whether it's tapping into funding sources, what then based on that, like I think there could be lots of different co-ops, and our hope is that we can support a handful of pilot projects in the months to come, given the various funding opportunities that are coming out in Los Angeles.
That's a good point, Helen. That's also something that we've been kind of struggling with, in the sense that we do have a pilot project where we're looking specifically for essentially new development, just because we don't want to displace anybody. However, at the same time, we are looking at, like, similar to what EPA can do, is scatter sites, and looking at for sites that are being sold. But we're still looking at seeing if there is pre-existing folks living there. We don't want to displace anybody during that process. So maybe they have a vacancy of 2 units. And so kind of working with those models, or both of those aspects, and seeing how we could essentially create the co-ops from there. But we don't want to, at the end of the day, we don't want to displace anybody from where they are living currently.
And then I'm going to open up
To what Oscar is saying, our goal is not to displace anyone as well. And I think that's what's hard with kind of the geography and the housing landscape in Northeast LA, where we have community members who are renters that want to figure out how they can acquire property, but to acquire a property that hasn't been flipped, where there isn't existing tenants, is really hard. So that combination between like kind of acquiring existing housing, maybe new construction, it's kind of like it's like a puzzle piece.
adding a bit to this puzzle piece to discuss, and I have a feeling from the flow of the conversation we may not be getting to this in this conversation, but how do you discuss member buy-in with prospective members? If there's a fee, or do you discuss share loans, or is that just still being developed under the works right now? I see a nod from Helen that this is being developed under the works. So Oscar, how's it happening on your end?
You're talking about member buy-in into the co-op. So yes, that's something that we talk to our folks. So we do have a like a pilot project, a core group of about 19 folks. And so what we did originally is, okay, we kind of kept it just us as the organizers, knowing how much people have in their savings accounts, as an entrance, saying, okay, this is kind of the baseline of what we have to work with when it comes down to buy-in. So essentially buying a member share. Some of our folks have zero. Some of our folks do have a little bit of savings. but it's not much. And so how do we make that not much work for a certificate, or so a share loan? And that's something that we've been talking to different funders and seeing if there's something in the pipeline that we can work with subsidies, for example. So it's a little bit of a challenge because we have done pro formas on a couple of sites. Actually, I would say like a total of 8 sites. And the share loan price is difficult because we need to find subsidies to be able to help fund those. And so that, that is a challenge, and we've been clear with our folks is that, that's essentially their investment into this co-op, that we want to make sure that it works, and that's money that, and if in case it doesn't work, then they may not get back. And so, that's the challenging part of just starting fresh and kind of creating it new, is those risks that are associated with that process. And luckily our folks have been very understanding and wanting to figure out solutions to that process, but that's something that we're still trying to figure out, and how that essentially that capital stack is going to work out for the development of a project or for the rehabilitation of an existing site. So it's not an easy answer.
So I kind of want to just, before we move on to the next session for community engagement with neighborhood serving communities, I know there was like a few things in the chat that I want to kind of see if we can have some discussion on, before shifting on to a different stage of community engagement. So you guys have been talking about like obtaining loans, and how that's different for a co-op versus single family home ownership. But what about like for different races within California, of how it's difficult for them to even get single family home mortgages? And I want to see, Eric, if you want to kind of have that, bring that question here, or if you want me to just read your text. Okay, I'm reading them. Okay, so the reading is, so home ownership opportunities have barriers because banks have gotten out of the home mortgage business, and BIPOC families face systemic oppression by banks to lending opportunities, specifically Black and Brown families in California, according to Cal HFA. So given that kind of baseline setting for single family home ownership, like how do you see that landscape with the co-op landscape, like that interconnections?
I could chime in a little bit about this. So we're actually working with Cornell University. There's some research students that we're working with, and we're researching alternative finance models with them right now. But we're also working with Frolic, working with other folks like Share Capital to figure out how we can create a financial model that actually benefits folks. So going back to the point of what I said about, share loans, that's something that we're trying to figure out with them, is how do we structure that process. But luckily, what we found out through the research that we're doing with Cornell is that, there's public funding that actually is targeting just that, is how do we make it more accessible. So there should be public funding available in the city or in the state, or in the county, where those funds are allocated for those specific purposes, is kind of, correcting those issues that have been done. Other parts of what we're looking into is, those public funding, the grants, and seeing, because there is a lot of language addressing those issues. And so that is kind of our hope, is where those type of funding is accessible for our folks to be able to create the capital stack needed to be able to direct us in the way of making those projects reality. And when it comes into like specific, homeownership programs, one of the things that has been spoken about previously in other spaces is how do we include the benefits of home ownership programs into limited equity housing co-ops or into co-ops in general. However, I don't know where that stands at the moment, and it might just be a conversation that people are trying to figure out. But there is conversations around that at the moment.
Eric, your point is like so it's like so true, and I would say that we haven't spent any energy on trying to kind of change that single family home owner kind of financing process. I think what we've been trying to do is kind of use our 501c3 status as an entity that's able to receive public funding. We have fundraising ability to figure out how we can close the gap, and that's why the question that Garland asked, like, are we open to, do we act as a CLT? I think it's like, yes, we can, depending on how we can get housing to kind of just stay in the community. So we're not prescriptive of it has to be this model, because it's like every model has its challenges. And for us, we want to start with where our residents are most interested in kind of making a project a reality. And for us not to kind of pursue it on our own, but to do it in partnership with community members. The thing that I think has been really fascinating is that there has been a coalition in Los Angeles, the Coalition to House LA, that are represented by so many grassroots organizations representing BIPOC communities. And for a ballot measure to be passed, and to now that's kind of a power struggle of like the housing, the housing department, the mayor's office wants to figure out how it's implemented, but this coalition wrote the measure and it got passed. So in the next couple of months, as the regulations are officially adopted by the city, that will be kind of where we'll see if the money ends up being accessible to the communities that wrote and passed this measure. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's a big victory to have this big tax that is going to be hopefully be able to fund more projects like co-ops, knowing that kind of the city in its traditional form doesn't really support that, because they are about, we either support you as an individual or we give money to, organizations that will have to follow a whole bunch of complicated rules. Which is great how SOMOS Mayfair, you guys are trying to navigate that as well.
Yeah, Eric said something really important here. It says, low-income families also experience barriers to creditworthiness as additional barrier to capital. 100%. And that's some of our folks have that issue, and so wrapping our head, and that's where we feel like going after a blanket loan is more accessible than just one person going after and trying to get a loan by themselves. That is something that our folks are worried about, and some of our folks don't even have bank accounts, and so that is a reality. And we're hoping that going together as a group for a blanket loan and working with all these different folks does open doors and does essentially create a recipe that other folks could use in their own communities.
Wonderful discussion on all the different challenges and opportunities and just the journey itself with your community members. And now to expand it a little bit, we're going to talk about community engagement on the neighborhood and surrounding community level. I do want to shout out to Ileana for expanding these questions, so thank you on that. So to kick off the first one, has your organization hosted or plan to host conversations with the neighborhood residents about developing a housing co-ops in their locale?
Yeah, I could go. Yeah, definitely. We're actually, well, we've hosted workshops in the past, but we're gonna start kind of continue doing series of workshops around popular education around housing cooperatives, to really build up that awareness of like and opportunities to plug in to kind of the pilot that we're going through, and to really explore what the feasibility is and carrying out a housing cooperative, and really being able to share like what's that good mid ground of like where community has capacity and where like our organization has capacity to support housing cooperatives, right? Like how do we show up after we've shared, you know, what the opportunities, possibilities could be, but also develop a collective housing working group. That's something that we're working on as well, is that where we get community members that are invested in a couple of these strategies to really support other community members, right? Or have them develop their own kind of community that they've identified, like, hey, we'd like to work on this together and develop a cooperative, right? And so that's what we're really trying to do, is like trying to support you know, those opportunities where communities are already organized and engaged, you know. And a lot of our work is we work very closely with tenant unions to really understand you know, being able to support the people that are in the highest need to, you know, to identify housing and be able to get stable housing. And, you know, and a lot of that is very difficult, you know, because there's this like, you know, there's that fine line of, you know, something that what they're facing, which is like a possible eviction or not being able to, you know, afford their home or where they're staying. And so we're hoping that these kind of popular education workshops get people to understand a little bit more about the opportunity to connect to resources, but also like something to look ahead as well.
I know for our organization, what we've done is we've held collective meetings where folks from the community and from our folks from different programming within the organization actually they've come and learned about the model, and they've actually gave us permission to go out and do the work that we're doing right now. And so we have included them in the process in terms of, you know, the decisions of saying, okay, this is something that we do want to explore. How are we going to explore this? Are we going to talk to property owners in the community and seeing if they are willing to sell us their property to be able to create these projects? And so we have included them in the process, and we also have included them in the education of the model. But something that we do want to do when we get to that point is include the rest, you know, the wider community into this model. But before we do that, we do want to make sure that we do have all the details figured out before we do that. And because I'm sure for other folks would be interested in replicating the model, we want to make sure that we have capacity to be able to do that. And so that's where we're sticking with the folks that are participating in our programming, and the families participating in our programming. And then from there, being able to expand and get the wider net into the community.
Thank you. So is it just to unpack that a bit more, because it sounds like, I think, Oscar, where you're coming from, like the people you're engaged with are people who are interested first right now in establishing the housing co-ops, and you're still waiting for expanding it to the wider community. And I think Miguel, I think you shared that, right? They are in the journey together, I think, with the wider community of like how they're going to be using housing co-ops. So for the people who aren't going to be part of the co-ops, like in the future, like that just wants to be supportive of this process, or who you have engaged in all these like meetings, events, kind of like these relationship buildings, are the non-prospective members usually open about the idea of a co-op in their city or neighborhood? Or have you had some like pushback?
Yes, actually, we actually have a community member who's participating in our programming, learning about co-ops and figuring out how to make these models work. And, you know, she's a homeowner. And so it just goes to show that it's actually benefiting the community and the neighborhood to have, you know, homeowners involved in the process, but also at the same time, folks who are interested in co-ops. And being able to, because they are a part of the community, and they are a part of what makes that community, you know, that community. And so with that in mind, you know, there's interest from both sides to be able to, you know, keep a safe community, stable community, making sure that folks can find the resources they need in the community, small businesses, our folks do own small businesses. And so, it goes back into the idea of investing into our communities and our local economies. And so I think that all of those things are tied into making sure that folks have a stable, safe place to live in.
I think we have a very similar approach in the sense that we see we call our people members of our solidarity ecosystem, where we center working class communities of color, but we also welcome allies to be part of our space, knowing their location. And I think what is helpful in Northeast LA is because there are lots of people who perhaps have roots, but they now are, middle upper class, and they want to, kind of respect who has been here. It's part of their roots. We make space for allies, and I think having allies in our system makes our work stronger, especially with shifting of resources. There are allies who are open to sharing their property, helping with fundraising. So I think that as our pilot projects kind of move forward, to kind of just maintain those kind of that vision of like, in our work, this is who we center, but we welcome allies to join in our work if they share our values.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, just broadening the net a little bit more for the people in the neighborhood, but how would you engage with just a little bit more of the broader community? Like, I think you guys most have mentioned the local officials on the co-op's housing strategy, or just like how has the relationship or conversations been unfolding? I guess that's another way to look at that question.
I can start. I think one of our what is essential is to be in solidarity with other organizations that are doing this work. Because although we might be geographically focused, like there are lots of other organizations with shared values supporting kind of similar communities, and together, kind of similar to the co-op model, there's greater power in working together. So for us, we're in coalition spaces. There's a coalition called Alliance for Community Transit of Los Angeles. The Unite to House LA coalition is another one that I had mentioned. There has been so much movement with these coalitions kind of working together, and oftentimes having elected officials and government agencies either as a partner and a supporter, but or kind of as an instigator. So the tax that I mentioned, it was a deliberate decision to not engage city agencies to give feedback, but there were elected officials that actually pushed the measure forward as well and supported the policy. So I think for us, just kind of engaging the traditional kind of affordable housing community development corporation and other community-based organizations, as well as sharing in our popular education. There is a slow and growing network of community land trusts, and although we're not officially a land trust, like there's so much shared value. So being able to kind of share in that kind of popular education and be able to go like, this is adjacent to what you're already working on. And we're lucky now that we have a new elected officials, like the city council kind of brought on like kind of there's two organizers on the city council, and that's actually where we work. So there's exciting prospects for partnerships there.
Oh, for us, one of the biggest things that have come from the city, I'll put it in the chat for y'all, but essentially the city of San Jose has committed itself to a citywide residential anti-displacement strategy. And so to figure out solutions of how to stop displacement in the city of San Jose. And so we've been working with, the housing department. We've been working with organizations like South Bay CLT, Luna, and other folks, or Amigos de Guadalupe, to be able to work and figure out solutions to solve this problem, the housing crisis that we are going through here in the city. Through that process is kind of creating an ecosystem of how to address the housing crisis, where folks who do need, short-term housing and get the help they need, but folks who do need long-term housing, how does this work? And so we know that through this process, we have known that we need to address the housing crisis at the root of the problem, which is folks can't get access to affordable housing, and the eviction process, contributes to the houseless problem that we are experiencing right now. And so working with different folks and different agencies to address this problem, it kind of creates that holistic approach of not only one organization can solve this, but we all have to work together, and that is the city, the county, the state, to be able to address these problems. So we don't have to repeat that. We don't have to keep addressing them every 6 years or every year. We want to make sure that we address the problem from the beginning so we can focus on other issues and benefiting other areas that our community does need. And so that's something that we've been working with, and also working with consultants like Community Vision, working with Cornell's University to conduct research. All these different agencies and all these different organizations have really come together to be able to, one, give us a direction and how to go this, and two is how do we continue to bring community along through this process, because it is challenging. It's a lot of information. And so how do we make sure that we're going in the right direction, but most importantly, how do we make sure that community is coming along with us through that process and making sure that they actually sit at the table and making sure that their voices are heard through that process to address the root causes of those problems.
I thought Miguel was gonna jump in, but but let's move on to the next question. So I'm just gonna read this, but if it doesn't sound, if you need more clarification, I'm probably will ask Ileana to expand on it more. But does your organization plan co-ops as third spaces?
Yeah. So a big aspect of our work is also, that connection to community and the connection to land. And so in a lot of our regenerative economies work, there has been a lot of movement in developing worker co-ops as a way to support, food justice, food distribution efforts. And so identifying a place that supports, storage where people could, develop a cooperative out of. But also, I think a lot of our kind of community serving entrepreneurs that work with us work out of their home, and so I think we want to support a place where people can organize out of, which that includes like either a community center or a community farm or a location that just could be, ran by community, and we just kind of step in and offer some of the programming and through our leadership program. And so that's kind of like how we saw the use of like a third spaces, right?
One of the things that we've thought about or has been discussed when we think about, co-ops, essentially is like residents who live in the community and participate in our programming. But at the same time, they act as an incubator, so folks can come and learn about these spaces. And if they're interested in replicating them in a different area of town or a different neighborhood in the east side of San Jose, how can they come and learn about this? And so, that's how that's what we've talked about those those co-op spaces as learning and continue to be continue to be participants in our program, but at the same time, help essentially support certain policies that we have, like the tenant preference policy that we're trying to pass right now, or bring attention to other issues that need to be done, similar to like housing associations or tenant associations. So, that's essentially how we talked about them, but at the same time, we haven't really refined that too much just yet, just because, we haven't got to that point of seeing how that ecosystem would look like with, co-ops in them. But we do plan on looping them in that process. And going off of the question that Ileana has here, how do you message co-ops as a preservation or production strategy? So for us, I would say they're both. One of them is a brand new development, for example, but the other side is we're looking at scatter sites, so preservation. We've talked about this, and our ideal for us is preservation because it's cheaper. In the long term, it's cheaper, and our folks don't have 5 to 7 years to wait for a brand new development to actually happen. And so, our main focus is preservation. However, there might be funding available for brand new development. It kind of just depends on which one we get first at that point. But our main interest is preservation because it is quicker. There's less impact to environment. And overall, our folks would be housed sooner than if we go down the route of production.
Yeah, just to echo, yeah, the preservation is key, right? And I think a big piece of that is like we want to be able to connect with people that are already organized with their community, or if they're in an apartment complex, how to leverage those relationships and be able to like kind of get that low hanging fruit, if you could say that. When we talk about like housing co-ops and how people could transition that potential ownership into like communities' hands, right? And so I think a big piece is like we're trying to connect with a lot of those places that a lot of those apartment complexes or housing situations that people already organized, or people have this like ongoing connection relationship. And so very much kind of like what Óscar said is preservation, because yeah, there's a lot of development that's already of has occurred, and so a big piece is like our connection to land is also in that same vein. And so we have to consider like what is that also taking away when we're overdeveloping a community as well.
And then to wrap up this section for the neighborhood, how does the proximity to local businesses or employment centers factor in the creation of co-ops, or how does that attract members?
One of the things that we noticed is that, for example, if a co-op is stationed or is developed or is in front of a high traffic bus stop, that's also an incentive. The city might have funding available for that. Just because there's less cars on the road, because emissions and all these different benefits when you think about climate change if using public transportation instead of driving. However, there is an issue with that because our folks may not live in the neighborhood, may not work in the neighborhood. They might be working in Palo Alto, but they live in the east side of San Jose, so they have to take, they have to drive, or they have to take 4 or 5 different buses to get to where they work. And so they have to leave 2 to 3 hours earlier than what normally was if you had a car. And so, that's one of the challenges that our folks had, that we've been talked about is how do we address that problem, but also how do we improve our public transportation to be more accessible and be more catering to where folks are living, or how do we bring small businesses into the neighborhoods where our folks work so they won't have to travel so far for their employment. That those are discussions that we've had. However, talking to some small business owners in the neighborhood, gentrification also impacts them because they're also getting their increase in rent because of the area is lucrative. And so those retail spots become really inaccessible for small businesses because they're also trying to benefit from the gentrification of the area. And so it's not a I would say like an easy answer just because it has a multitude of different aspects attributed to it. However, our folks are interested in creating an ecosystem where people can live, people can, have their childcare in the neighborhood. They want childcare co-ops, they want business co-ops, they want libraries, they want murals, they want, all these different aspects. But again, it goes back to the point of having multiple agencies, recognizing the importance of that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, a lot of our, a lot of we engage with a lot of the local businesses when it comes to, how they show up for our working class communities. Um, and then really like a lot of the residents that we work with, they actually work from their home, and so I think it's like making that connection where um the location matters, if people wanting to be connected to each other, but also like public transit is limited, kind of similar to like what Oscar was saying. um and yeah, not a lot of residents have cars, and so I think it's important that our community members have access to those businesses and employment centers. But I think again, just like I think in the spectrum of housing, or the opportunities of housing, we're just like, okay, we're trying to see what's actually available, where's the opportunities, and try to figure out what how those connections can come with that.
Oscar, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, we actually did is it okay if I share my screen? I know I said I wasn't, but I think that, going off of this is really important. It's a process that we actually did with the community that started about 4 years ago, to where we're at right now. And so what we did is we held a session called Visión de la Comunidad, or Community Vision, where folks actually discussed what they wanted in the community. So community wanted community empowerment, safe and stable housing, and a starting point for the future. And so folks came together, and this is all done on paper and sticky notes. There was youth, there was elders, there was an array of different folks who actually participated. And so in this process, so you're able to see that we have housing co-ops, job training, libraries. We have, like almost like mercados, so little markets, all of this, and community land trust, all of this with the idea of making sure that it's accessible in walking distance or a short ride of public transportation for folks in the community. And so this is something that we've been using to show the direction that we want the community or the neighborhood to actually go in. And we had a multitude of different folks involved in that process that started about 4 years ago. And so we actually worked with a local artist to draw this map to actually bring everybody together to be able to envision the community and envision something different.
That's a really cool map. Does anyone want to have any questions following that map specifically, or any of the other things that are discussed as we were talking about the broader community? I'm just holding this time before we go on to property owners, and this is also open for if you guys as speakers want to talk to each other, that's also doable as well. Okay.
Oh wait, hold on, Denny. One of the things that has come to my mind is, listening to Helen and Miguel, is that there's a lot of similarities in the landscapes that we're both experiencing in two different areas, right? We're in Northern California, in San Jose, and they're in Los Angeles. And so, we're both experiencing the same issues. We're experiencing, community wants the same things. And so, I think these spaces are really important to be able to dialogue and be able to, is like, how do we work together to address and combine our focus? Because again, we can't do all of this work alone. So that's something that really kind of just stands out to me listening to y'all answer some of these questions.
feel like there's a lot of agreement. And probably if we had more emojis, that will probably floating up onto the screen too. Now let's move on to property owners, and then it'll be full on floor open for everyone. But I do agree with you. I am hearing a lot of similarities from two very different communities across the geographic range. It'll be interesting as we bring in more communities, how the similarities, but also like the differences and distinctions that each one's facing. So for property owners, are there, like, what are the similarities and what are the differences as you start to talk about housing co-ops between property owners and future co-op members?
I can start. We see property owners as allies in our solidarity ecosystem, and similar to understanding kind of what a housing co-op is, I think there's a similar journey with property owners. We have been approached kind of every now and then with a property owner who's intrigued by the concept of what we're doing and aspiring to kind of have the property and the assets that they own to be more community serving. And what we found is that there's a lot to work through with the property owner, you know, how they got the property, kind of how they want to honor the legacy of that, how they feel they belong in the community, what's their personal vision versus what it would mean to work with us. So if we were going to be that intermediary with community, like our kind of requirement is like, well, we want there to be community agency in the process, and finding that balance between how much agency a property owner is willing to let go of is a negotiation, and it kind of determines whether there's alignment of values. And I think there's another component of finances. A lot of property owners, you know, some that we've known have property that they got really cheap, and they're like, okay, it's cost a lot of money now, and I'm willing to kind of part with it. But they might have some financial requirement. Sometimes it's like, I just don't want to lose any money. Sometimes it's like, well, I actually also have extra money to give. Like last week, there was a community member who is ready to not pass on a piece of property to their child, and rather wants to kind of have a conversation with our organization about what does it look like to kind of transition that property so that there is a community serving component to it. And there's so many things that to be discussed, which is like, well, like, what is that process? Like, what will your role be as a property owner now? And as it transitions, what's the role of LMAS? So I think it's very similar to kind of a housing co-op kind of coming up with its rules. But I think that with a property owner, kind of to get to the place where it's like, okay, this piece of property is much easier to access than trying to buy property with public money, trying to buy property from, you know, from a corporate landlord or from someone who's looking to evict their existing tenants. It's a starting point, which perhaps it's like less antagonistic, and it starts with some shared values. And we have a couple of those opportunities we're going to be working through, and hopefully will result in some sharing of assets and shifting of resources and shifting of power and having community take stewardship. But it is, I think, different just because of kind of the power dynamics of someone has to let go of and share kind of their power and resources.
I know for us, we, you know, we're even internally, we're still trying to figure out like who's going to hold the property. You know, we've discussed like working with CLTs to, you know, South Bay CLT to hold the property while we figure out how we can transition into full ownership to of the co-op and the property to the residents or the owners. And so when it comes down to talking to property owners, you know, it's been a little challenging, you know, given that the market here is very competitive. And we're also going to have, you know, BART moving. And so there's a lot of folks who really are interested in gentrifying the area. You know, you drive around, you'll see signs that they'll say, you know, pay cash for $2 million cash for your home, you know. So these are the things that we're experiencing in the neighborhood. And it's a little challenging because, you know, so far to this point, we've encountered homeowners who are interested in the current real estate market ideas of maximizing their profit on the site. And so that's been a challenging part of that. And another challenging part is that a lot of our folks in our neighborhood rent. And so, they're not homeowners of their home, even though they've lived there for 25 to 30 years. And so, that is a strategy that we're still trying to refine on how to talk to the owners and express that, this would actually help a multitude of different generations stay in the community, have access to affordable housing. And so we're still working on how to create a strategy around that. But most importantly is how, what is our role as an organization in the community when it comes into holding property. Because in order for us to hold property, we have to change our mission statement. And there's a lot of other challenges associated with that process that we have not fully discussed yet. And so that's where we're at currently, is still trying to figure out our place, figure out a better way to communicate with homeowners for their sites. So we're still learning more about that process now.
I want to respond to what Oscar is saying, like who owns a property is also something that for us, we don't want to be prescriptive of certain like land trusts do things a certain way, a traditional affordable housing developer does it a certain way. And it's just really important that kind of whoever holds it keeps in mind this concept of community stewardship and hopefully in perpetuity and not, when tax credits expire. So that's something that we're going to have to figure out as well, knowing that funding sources kind of dictate a certain direction. But it is like really important too. So hopefully one of these allies who are property owners are ready to transfer their property. We'll have more to share on who ends up holding it.
This is very interesting. It'll be really cool to follow up on how these discussions are unfolding, like down the line. So curiously, as we're talking about property owners, this is just more direct questions. Do you guys directly approach a property owner? I think I've heard some of that. Or is this a discussion through realtors, or is realtors even in the mix? I guess is the question.
For us, what we've done is identified around 7 to 8 sites that we're interested, that makes the most sense for the project that we have in mind. And so we're actually working with, different folks, like consulting folks, to be able to create essentially, we have a pro forma, essentially what are the benefits that that individual homeowner is going to get. Is it, if they sell it outright, there's been interest from other folks, property owners, when it comes down to equity, how would that equity share look like in this bite? And so we are trying to essentially create a pitch deck to highlight some of those pieces, and so we can have a dialogue conversation with that property owner and say, look, these are the benefits that's going to have in the community, but these are also the benefits that you're going to get, and this is what you're going to get for for allowing us to either buy your site or for you to enter as a limited partner with a equity share for the equity component. And so those are still something that we're still trying to refine and come to an agreement of how to have that conversation. But we are working with folks to be able to create a pitch deck to highlight not only the impact that site is going to have, the positive impact, but also the benefit that they're going to get as an owner, as a property owner.
Thank you guys for sharing. For Ellie Moss, is it more of a direct conversations? It's like, how is it happening on your end?
It's very similar to Oscar. We've been kind of reactive to just opportunities of property owners coming our way. But what we hope to do is to be proactive and actually to leverage the existing relationships that our residents and our allies have with our community. our community is like composed of like a handful of neighborhoods, and people love their neighborhoods. Like there's like so much pride. Like now behind me is like Frogtown, where I grew up, and there are people who just, you know, have owned property and they may be willing to sell, but they, you know, all they're getting approached by are kind of flippers offering cash. So what we hope is to have a more proactive campaign to say, like, rather like sell to us, sell to your neighbors. So we're hoping to do that, and to do that in partnership with our residents in the next couple of months.
Also, your effort sounds very exciting. So definitely be following up to see how that is unfolding. And reaching to the final question, and almost near the end of the top of the hour. Curiously, what concerns do property owners have, and how are their concerns addressed? For example, parking, property taxes, etc.
You know, I guess one of the concerns that we've had, you know, the parking situation is more the neighborhood, you know, because the neighborhood already has so much car, parking is very limited. And so, you know, those concerns come more from the residents of the co-op, but also some folks that we do know in the neighborhood. When it comes into like the property owner, you know, one of the things that comes to my mind is, you know, equity. You know, if we go down the route of equity, how does that look like? How much am I gonna get from this site? How am I gonna be able to benefit from the Google campus moving in with also BART coming into San Jose? And so, you know, there's folks willing to pay 200 cash for a site that might cost only, you know, less than 800,000, you know? And so how do we compete with that with the amount of limited funds that we do have? And so it's more of the negotiations of coming to a price that makes sense. And so, you know, we've done appraisals on sites, but you know, the appraisal is way lower than what the property owner would want, and they want to see 4 times that price, which makes it really hard for us to even compete with that, because if we are using public funds, we can't go above that, you know, we can't go above the appraisal price. And so, you know, you know, ideally we would have a, you know, common ground on the price. However, with the Google campus and BART coming into town, it really complicates the idea of coming to an accessible number. And so that's something that we're trying to develop a little better when it comes down to the narrative of the community, the narrative of the folks who have lived in the community, to be able to work on a price that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the price is also something to keep, something that's just people also acquire. Like I would say that what's hard is that and it's real, is that for many families, like the property they own is like their sense of equity and wealth building, and how to share that when perhaps it means like less for their immediate family. And I think there's some property owners who are just like, I have more, and I don't need to make as much money as possible. And I think that there is more flexibility in those instances than to ask, say, like a mom and pop landlord who is using this as their retirement to share, versus someone who's like, well, I actually have many properties and I just want to do something differently. I think in an ideal world, like we're able to, you know, ask for a lower price without it compromising kind of the reality of our system, where for many people it's been their investment for a long time. So we have to balance that, and that's like a really hard balance, because we know it's all rooted in all these systems that don't work for our community.
And an important piece to that is that, you know, one aspect is the mom and pop owners. The other aspect is you have the venture capital firms who just want to maximize profits that are absurdly overpriced. And that is a really big challenging part when you're thinking about, you know, getting accessibility in the community, because, these firms are really just trying to maximize out profit. They may not have no relationship to the community, have no understanding of the dynamics of what is going on, or how beautiful the community may be with all the residents living there. And so, it's something that we're experiencing with, Go Campus coming in and Park coming in, is these firms really trying to maximize their profits in the areas who've been historically who've been marginalized for historically. And so, that is a real uphill battle when we're thinking about creating accessibility and stopping displacement in the neighborhoods, because there's different motives behind it. That's a profit motive at that point, and compared to just trying to create, affordable housing for folks to live here in a safe space. And that's really challenging. That's a hard part of this.
So we are 2 minutes to the top of the hour. I feel like we landed on share a lot of really wonderful progress that's been happening. Some sticky issues to be working through, and I guess working against this capitalistic mindset society that we are in on that end note. I just wanted to pass it back to the speakers to see if there is anything that you would like to share at the end of the session that you want folks to know about.
Maybe that this work takes time. The traditional affordable housing industry has their systems down, the sources of funding kind of predictable. But I think the work that our organizations are doing is it's just different. It takes longer, and it really builds. It requires a foundation of community trust and resident commitment to one another and their community, and that takes a lot of time. So, I wish there were more funders out there to support this work, and for us not to recreate the wheel. So I'm so glad that Build It Green, you guys are hosting conversations like this, because I would say that we learned so much from hearing from Óscar and your amazing work in SOMOS Mayfair. So thank you.
What comes to my mind is, something similar that Helen said, is where this work does take a long time, but most importantly, it takes commitment from community, from different agencies, organizations, really coming together to address the problem and address the root problem. So we don't have to have this conversation 20 years or 30 years from now. We can focus on other issues that we know is going on that are affecting our community. Though having that kind of just be the center, okay, like how do we use that as the direction that we're going in to solve the problems, and similar to Helen, it's, finding partners who are interested in supporting these models. Also finding different, technical assistance that we may not know about, or different organizations who are doing similar work in different areas. That's where Build It Green really does come in, to be able to create that, essentially, that space to really have dialogue conversations like this, and seeing how we can support each other, since we all have the same mission, as how do we create, safe and affordable housing for our folks, and kind of redirect the historical racism that the community has been experiencing. And so, it's really hard to switch the idea of, I said, like the current real estate market. However, we do need a real estate market that actually benefits everyone, our folks, as housing is a human right, and not just those who are currently benefiting from what is going on in displacement, evictions that are creating other issues that we're seeing. And so, with that said, it would be great to have more conversations like this, and find out other like-minded individuals and organizations who are working on the same things, and finding partners who are willing to fund these projects.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this is thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you, Óscar, and I'm excited to be part of this conversation, because I think what we're doing here is really, being able to shift back to and transform our relationship to land in a way that really connects people. And although this is a strategy to address a concern, I think it's an opportunity for us to build anew of how we honor how our community relates to each other and how our community cares for their homes, for their land, for their community, you know. And so all this work is definitely it's gonna take time, but I think and care, you know, but I think it's very much worth it because, you know, there's not a lot of this work that's happening, you know, that addresses these concerns, and that comes at this opportunity to like make those connections. Like it's interesting, you know, both of our Oscar's work with Somos Mayfair and our work with Mas, it's like this beautiful like interconnectedness where we're just like, we're not only just talking about housing, but we're talking about how it connects to transportation. We're talking about how it connects to economic livelihood, you know. And so I think this is something that is holistic in a way that we are also building up the foundation for our communities to really show up and take ownership, literally take ownership, right? And that is a shift in how our community shows up and for themselves as well. So I'm glad, and I hope that everybody else is striving to do this type of work. So it makes things easier for us in the long run, right? Because I think the more of us that do it, the more funders we're gonna have, the more people that more elected officials we don't have to um, we don't have to convince, right? But people just understand, you know. And I think that's what we're doing, is that changing that understanding. So thank you.
Thank you all for ending on such like a
Thanks,
hopeful
everyone.
as well as grounding note. So a few things is that I will be sharing the notes and the recordings for this as well as the chat dialogue. When I come back, I'll be gone for like, as some of you guys have mentioned, it's like an internal event that we're hosting for the gathering for Big. As well as I'll be gone for like a 2 weeks vacation near the end of November. So a lot of follow-up is going to be happening at December, but I think a lot of work is going to be underway. If you guys have any ideas, thoughts, or anything else that you feel would help for this session, just let me know. But just want to again thank Helen, Miguel, and Oscar just for making time and just sharing your wonderful knowledge and just like building on each other. So thank you.
Good to see you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Good to see you too. Take
Great
care.
one.
Thanks, y'all.